It's the 23rd of May, 2026. People walked along the streets outside the fences of the White House.
The federal guards operating the perimeter scanned the crowds for organized attackers. They watched the tree line for hidden threats. Families stood along the stone boundaries to take pictures. It looked like a normal spring evening in the Capitol, but the security teams ignored a young man carrying a simple messenger bag. That man was Nasire Best. He walked to the White House perimeter and fired a handgun at the exact officers who already knew his name. The firefight that followed forced a sudden lockdown of the presidential compound and left a civilian bleeding on the pavement. The official story praises a fast response, but those statements hide a terrible failure. A hidden paper trail shows how a broken local court let a known danger slip back into the city. The justice system had clear warning about this exact man almost a year earlier, yet he walked away without a fight. The atmosphere in the Capitol felt extremely tense. The entire month felt like a bomb waiting to go off. 3 weeks earlier, a man holding a 12-gauge shotgun ran past a security checkpoint at the Washington Hilton Hotel, firing at a guard right before the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Less than 2 weeks after that event, another man fired a pistol at officers near the Washington Monument as the motorcade of the vice president drove past, hitting a child in the crowd. The nation was watching a steady wave of political violence. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, was actively demanding a new fortified bunker disguised as a ballroom. His administration asked the courts to allow a heavy drone-proof roof and blast-proof glass to protect his staff. The federal guards were looking for coordinated assassins. They were scanning the crowds for organized attackers sent by enemies of the state. They were not looking for a lost boy from Maryland fighting a war inside his own head. Nasire Best grew up just an hour away in the suburbs of Dundalk. He was 21 years old and had graduated in the spring of 2023. His friends remembered him as a light-hearted and energetic kid. He was a normal teenager, but something began breaking inside his mind during his final year of school. The record is silent on this, but students later told reporters about a steady stream of bullying and a physical fight that resulted in a suspension from class. He missed his senior prom and the end of the track season. When the school year ended, he drifted into the adult world without a solid foundation. After he finished school, he tried to build a normal life. He took a job working at an Amazon delivery warehouse. Everything seemed fine on the outside, but then his mind started failing completely. The mental collapse was a slow rot. He began telling his co-workers strange things. He walked up to his friend and said he was in control of reality. He said he could tap into a different frequency that other people could not hear. His friend noticed the sudden change but did not know what to do. Then Best decided he was God. The voices in his head grew louder than the real world. He quit his job at the Amazon warehouse. He cut off all contact with his closest friends and fell completely out of view. By the winter of 2025, a legal dispute started, and his landlord kicked him out of his apartment for failing to pay his rent. He never showed up to the court hearing to defend his home. He drifted away from his mother and disappeared into the streets of the Capitol. The terrible problem was that as his mind broke, his attention locked onto the White House. The Secret Service actually knew exactly who he was. They had caught him testing their defenses a full year before he ever brought a gun to their doorstep. In the early summer of 2025, Best started walking around the outside of the complex on a regular basis. He walked up to guards and asked them how to get inside. He checked the gates to see how they locked. On June 26, 2025, he stepped in front of a car trying to drive onto the White House grounds. The police took him away, and doctors forced him into a mental hospital. But the medical hold lasted only a short time. Within 2 weeks, he was back at the White House. On July 10th, he walked directly up to an exit turnstile in a tight security zone. He slipped through the metal gap into a restricted space meant only for staff. Officers shouted loud commands for him to stop. Best ignored them. He walked forward until the guards grabbed him. When they spun him around, he told them his name was Jesus Christ. He said he wanted to be arrested. The officers charged him with entering federal property illegally. This is the exact moment the legal system stepped in to stop the coming violence and completely failed. The next morning, a judge in a local court released Best on one single condition: The judge demanded that he stay away from the White House. The court issued an official stay-away order. Best walked out the door and never came back. When the time came for his next required court date on August 7th, the chair was empty. The court issued a bench warrant for his physical arrest, but this warrant had a fatal flaw built into its design. It was only valid inside the city limits. Because Best still had a registered address in the state of Maryland, the warrant was completely ignored by the outside authorities. The local police were not sent to find him. Federal agents moved on to faster, more visible threats. Nasire Best was free to wander. Over the next 10 months, Best lived in the shadows. He stayed in the local area, walking the streets alone. His mind continued to spin far out of touch with reality. Investigators later found internet posts where an unknown user claimed to be the real Osama bin Laden. The user claimed to be the son of heaven. At least one post showed a clear desire to cause physical harm to President Trump, but nobody connected the random online threats to the young man drifting around the city. His mother had no idea where he was. She thought he was just living his life. His friends thought he had moved on to better things. No one can say where he bought his gun or how he kept it hidden. The security ring around the White House seems like an iron wall, but it is actually a system of separate filters. There is a wide pedestrian plaza crossing the north side of the grounds along Pennsylvania Avenue. It is a public space. Anyone can walk there. Tourists stand near the fence to take pictures. Coffee shops remain open nearby. To protect the inner grounds, the Secret Service uniformed division staffs small security booths at the edges of the plaza. These officers stand in plain view. They watch the crowds. They form the physical border between the public city and the restricted property. This creates a very difficult security problem. The guards have to protect the building without turning the city into a completely locked zone. They have to balance the open nature of the area with the heavy threat weighing down on the complex. The defense system has a major blind spot. A stay-away order is just a legal consequence. It is a piece of paper sitting in a file room. There is no facial recognition system actively stopping every person who walks down the public street toward the booth. There is no automated gate that drops when a sick man crosses the city line. The barrier relies entirely on the basic human belief that a person will not pull out a gun in a crowded public space and start a war. The system expects people to act like people. As evening closed in on May 23rd, all of those small failures lined up to form a straight path. Inside the White House, President Trump sat in the Oval Office, working on an international deal regarding Iran. His aides Stephen Chun and Natalie Harp were inside the room with him, alongside Margot Martin. A short press gathering ended at 5 o'clock. The journalists moved out to the north lawn of the White House to relax. The sun lowered in the sky. The pedestrian plaza outside the complex had just reopened to the public a few days prior, after a long closure. The space was full of people. Officers stood inside their booth near the corner of 17th Street. Nasire Best walked down the crowded sidewalk toward them. He carried a simple messenger bag. Without running or yelling, he walked toward the armed guards until the distance closed. The trap broke open just after 6 o'clock in the evening. Best stopped in front of the security booth. He reached his hand into his messenger bag and pulled out a loaded handgun. He aimed the weapon directly at the officers inside the booth and pulled the trigger. The sound of 3 gunshots ripped through the crowded plaza. The response was instant and overwhelming. The Secret Service uniformed division officers drew their weapons and returned fire immediately. Between 15 and 30 loud shots echoed across the north side of the grounds in a massive barrage. On the lawn inside, reporters dropped to the dirt. Secret Service agents sprinted across the grass, screaming for everyone to get down. The agents forced dozens of journalists to run into the press briefing room to hide. A hard lockdown fell over the entire compound. Out on the street, the firefight ended almost as quickly as it started. Best suffered heavy bullet impacts from the returning officer shots. He hit the ground. The bullets stopped flying, but the smoke cleared to reveal a terrible accident. A civilian man who had simply been standing nearby was bleeding on the concrete. An unknown bullet had hit him during the chaotic exchange of fire. Broken glass covered the sidewalk outside a tourist history shop. Panic took over the area as medical teams rushed toward the corner. Ambulances carried both men to the local hospital. The innocent bystander needed heavy surgery, but he survived the long night in serious condition. Nasire Best did not. The young athlete who thought he was a radio frequency died from his wounds, killed by the officers he forced into a shootout. The lockdown lifted about 40 minutes later. The president had never left the residence. He was safe inside. Federal agents from the FBI and the police department flooded the streets to close the area. By midnight, politicians were already using the dead boy from Maryland as fuel to demand faster construction of the new White House bunker. The tragedy exposed a deep failure in how authorities handle the most vulnerable people walking among them. The administration spent massive amounts of money building thick blast walls and drone-proof roofs to fight invisible armies, but abandoned the basic systems that keep lonely people from falling into madness. What happened outside the White House that evening felt impossible. A man the Secret Service already knew walked straight up to the perimeter and opened fire in front of tourists and reporters. But this was not the first time the country had watched a hidden disaster unfold in plain sight. In Boston, decades earlier, an entire neighborhood was wiped away by something just as ordinary and overlooked: sugar. We covered this story in a previous video on our channel, and you can watch it by clicking on the video that is on your screen right now. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Stay safe.